All right, let's dive into Arizona housing. We're talking Section 8 and the broader affordable housing scene in Arizona. To get a real grasp on this, we've pulled some fascinating sources.
Oh, yeah.
We've got the latest income limits, the utility allowances for the Section 8 program, and a recent amendment to Arizona's home ARP allocation plan, which, really dives into the state's housing needs.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is. And then we've got instructions on how to apply for Section 8 specifically in Tucson, and we're even going to peek into what it's like to invest in Section 8 properties through some YouTube videos.
Interesting.
Plus, we'll be checking out the Arizona Department of Housing's Asset Management Handbook and their website to get that bigger picture.
So we're like piecing together a puzzle here with all these sources.
Exactly. And by breaking them all down, we're going to cover some real insights. So first things first, what exactly is the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program and how does it work in Arizona?
Well, Section 8 is a federal program, funded by HUD, but it's actually run at the local level by public housing authorities, or PHAs.
Okay.
It's all about helping low-income families, seniors, and people with disabilities find decent housing.
Decent and affordable, right?
Yeah, affordable in the private market.
So it's not just about those government housing projects.
Right. There are actually two main types of Section 8. You've got the voucher program, which is flexible. You can choose your own housing as long as it meets their standards.
Yeah.
And then you have project-based assistance, which is tied to specific properties.
Got it. So in Arizona, the Arizona Public Housing Authority, or APHA, is kind of the big player in all of this?
Precisely. They administer the program and ensure things run smoothly.
Okay. So now, the big question. Can you actually afford to live in Arizona on Section 8?
Right.
We have the 2024 Section 8 income limits here. What are these telling us?
These income limits, they're essential because they determine who's even eligible. And, they vary depending on where you live in Arizona.
Right, of course.
For instance, a family of 4 in Maricopa County, which includes Phoenix, Mesa, and Scottsdale, needs to have an extremely low income of $31,200 or less per year to qualify.
$31,200. Wow.
Yeah.
Some people might be thinking, wait, that seems a bit high for extremely low income. But, we're talking about Phoenix here. Costs are rising everywhere, but especially there.
Exactly. And it's not just Phoenix. These limits change from county to county because HUD factors in the cost of living in those areas.
Right.
Like, take Graham County. It's much more rural, so the income limits there are lower, reflecting the lower cost of living.
Okay, that makes sense. So anyone thinking of applying for Section 8 in Arizona, first step, check those income limits for your specific county. But it's not just income we need to think about, right?
No.
What about utilities?
Oh, good point. Section 8 also helps with utility costs through utility allowances. And the APHA, they have a document breaking down exactly what's covered, and it's surprisingly detailed.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
So, what if I'm comparing a 2-bedroom apartment versus a 5-bedroom house? How would the utility allowances differ?
Well, the document lays out specific allowances based on, the number of bedrooms, the type of heating you have, and even whether you have air conditioning.
Which is pretty crucial here in Arizona.
Yeah. So naturally, a bigger house, more bedrooms, maybe a more complicated heating system would have a higher utility allowance compared to a smaller apartment.
They've really thought of everything, even separate allowances for things like cooking and water heating.
Yep.
And they even factor in things like refrigerators and ranges.
It's all about trying to make housing truly affordable, considering all the costs.
Right. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about the overall housing situation in Arizona. We've got this AZA Home ARP allocation plan's second substantial amendment, which I'll admit looks pretty dense.
Yeah.
But I'm sure it has some crucial insights.
This plan is all about figuring out how to use federal funds to help people struggling to find affordable housing.
Oh.
And the big takeaway, Arizona, like a lot of states, is facing a real housing crisis. There just aren't enough affordable options to meet the demand.
And we're not just talking about people experiencing homelessness, right?
No, not at all.
There are a lot of families just scraping by, spending way too much of their income on rent.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The report actually highlights some pretty startling statistics.
Like what?
For example, there's an estimated gap of, get this, over 40,000 tenant-based rental assistance vouchers needed across the state.
Wow.
And that's just for households with incomes below 50% of the area median income who are, really struggling to afford their rent. And that's just one part of the problem.
It's really eye-opening. So knowing all that, let's look at what it takes to actually get on the Section 8 waitlist. We've got this document from Tucson outlining the process. What stood out to you?
Well, first thing, the application process itself seems pretty straightforward. Tucson has a user-friendly online application,
Good.
and it's available in multiple languages, which is great for accessibility.
That's fantastic, especially because language barriers can be such a huge hurdle. But there's got to be a catch, right?
Well, the catch is that demand just way exceeds the available resources.
Yeah.
There's a wait list, and it could be really long.
How long are we talking?
We're talking a year or more in a lot of cases.
Oof. So even if you're eligible and you submit everything perfectly, there's no guarantee you're getting a voucher anytime soon.
Exactly. There are over 15,000 applications just in Tucson's system right now. It really shows how badly Arizona needs more affordable housing options.
Okay, so we've seen the challenges for those looking for affordable housing, but let's flip things around and look at it from a real estate investor's perspective. We got these two YouTube videos, one by Noel Randall and another by Eric Spofford, about investing in Section 8 properties. Anything catch your eye?
What really struck me is how these videos emphasize the potential financial benefits and stability of Section 8 as an investment.
Right.
Eric Spofford even calls it recession-proof. He points out that even during the pandemic, when so many other investments were struggling, Section 8 payments continued like clockwork.
That is a bold statement, but I can see why guaranteed rent would be attractive, especially with all the economic uncertainty.
Absolutely.
But I also remember Noel Randall mentioning the bureaucracy involved in being a Section 8 landlord. It's not exactly passive income, is it?
Not at all. To really get a handle on that, we should take another look at the Arizona Department of Housing's Asset Management Handbook.
Oh yeah, this thing.
This thing is packed with rules and regulations that any aspiring Section 8 landlord really needs to know about.
Just skimming through, I'm seeing procedures for ownership changes, loan servicing, even details on that qualified contract process.
Right, which lets landlords eventually exit the program after 15 years.
Exactly. And each of those processes, I'm assuming, comes with its own set of fees and steps, right?
Oh, absolutely. So those steady rent checks might sound great, but this definitely isn't a hands-off kind of investment.
So to anyone thinking of becoming a Section 8 landlord, organization and attention to detail are, like, non-negotiable.
100%. And let's not forget those annual inspections. Remember, Section 8 housing has to meet certain quality and safety standards. We want to make sure tenants are living in decent conditions.
Of course, but wouldn't that apply to any rental property?
Sure, but Section 8 has that added layer of scrutiny. The PHA is involved in the inspections, and they have specific checklists and guidelines.
Okay, so we've looked at Section 8 from both the tenant's and landlord's point of view. But it's just one piece of the puzzle, right? What about all the other affordable housing resources in Arizona?
Yeah, Arizona's got a lot more to offer than just Section 8.
Well, luckily, the Arizona Department of Housing has a bunch of other options.
They do. Programs like the Low-Income Housing Tax Credits, Private Activity Bonds, and the State Housing Fund, all designed to encourage and help finance more affordable housing.
So they're really trying to tackle this from multiple angles. It's not just building new units, right?
Right. They also have initiatives for community development and revitalization, which aim to improve existing housing and infrastructure in neighborhoods across the state.
It seems like they're taking a pretty holistic approach. It's not just about bricks and mortar, but about investing in communities and the people who live there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about creating a more equitable and sustainable housing landscape for everyone in Arizona.
Well, that's a great overview of Section 8 and just a taste of all the other resources out there. But this is just the beginning of our deep dive.
Yeah, we've got a lot more to uncover.
We'll be back to explore the pros and cons of becoming a Section 8 landlord, and we'll dive deeper into those other affordable housing programs.
So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
So we spent the last part getting a good feel for Section 8 in Arizona. But now I'm really curious about that whole Section 8 as an investment idea.
Yeah.
Especially, that recession-proof claim we heard from Eric Spofford.
Yeah, me too. That really caught my attention.
It's a bold statement, but he did make some good points about how those Section 8 payments kept coming in even during the craziest parts of the pandemic.
He did. That consistency is definitely appealing, especially like right now.
It is. But then there's what Noel Randall said about all the red tape.
Right.
Is it really worth the hassle?
That's the big question, isn't it? It's all about, weighing those potential benefits against the challenges.
For sure.
And I think to really understand that, we need to crack open the Arizona Department of Housing's Asset Management Handbook again.
This thing.
It's full of rules and regulations that any landlord who's thinking about Section 8 really needs to be aware of.
Even just glancing through it, I'm seeing stuff about ownership changes, loan servicing, and all the details of that qualified contract process.
Right, the one that lets landlords eventually leave the program after 15 years.
Exactly. And I imagine each of those processes comes with its own fees and steps, right?
Oh, definitely. So those steady rent checks might sound great, but it's definitely not a passive investment.
So anyone considering becoming a Section 8 landlord, organization and attention to detail are, like, essential.
Absolutely essential. And don't forget about those annual inspections.
Oh, right.
Remember, Section 8 housing needs to meet quality and safety standards. We want to make sure tenants are living in good conditions.
Of course, of course. But wouldn't that be the case for any rental property?
Yeah, but with Section 8, there's that extra level of oversight. The PHA is involved in those inspections, and they have very specific checklists and guidelines.
Okay, got it. So we've looked at Section 8 from both sides now, the
Yeah.
tenant side and the landlords. But how do you actually find Section 8 tenants?
Ah, good question. It's not like you could just, list your property on a regular rental website.
Right.
You need to work with the Public Housing Authority, the PHA, in your area.
So if I'm in Tucson, I'd reach out to the City of Tucson Housing and Community Development Department.
Exactly. They have their own requirements and procedures for landlords. They want to make sure your property meets their standards and that you understand your responsibilities as a Section 8 landlord.
Makes sense. They are the ones ultimately responsible for making sure everyone is treated fairly.
Right.
But what about rent limits? We talked about income limits for tenants, but are there rent limits for landlords?
Yes, there are. And this is where things can get a little complicated.
How so?
The PHA sets what they call a fair market rent, or FMR, for different types of units in different areas. And as a landlord, your rent can't be higher than that FMR, even if the market rate is higher.
So even though you're getting those guaranteed payments, you might be missing out on some potential income if the rental market is really hot.
That's the trade-off, yeah.
Yeah.
You get stability and lower risk, but you might not see those big rent increases that you would with a regular market rate rental.
So it's all about figuring out what's more important to you.
Exactly.
Okay, what about evictions? I imagine that process is more complicated with Section 8 tenants.
It can be, yeah. Remember, the PHA is involved in the process, and you need their approval to evict a tenant. There are very specific rules and procedures.
So no just giving someone a 30-day notice.
Right. It's really important to document everything. Communication with your tenants, any notices you serve, maintenance requests, repairs. That way, if you ever have to go through that eviction process, you have a clear record.
That's good advice for any landlord, really.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
But especially with Section 8, where there's more oversight.
Yeah.
Honestly, though, the best way to avoid evictions is to just be a good landlord.
Right.
Address maintenance issues quickly, communicate clearly with your tenants, and try to build a good relationship.
Create a win-win where everyone feels respected and their needs are met.
Exactly. But even then, sometimes things happen. So let's talk about those steps involved in evicting a Section 8 tenant.
Okay, walk me through it.
All right, so first, like I said, documentation is key. You have to make sure you followed all the proper procedures, starting with serving the correct notices.
Right.
And those notices need to be very specific, clearly stating the reason for the eviction and complying with both Arizona law and HUD regulations.
So no shortcuts.
No shortcuts. And if, after you've served those notices, the tenant still doesn't leave, you'll need to file a formal eviction lawsuit in court.
And remember, the PHA has to be involved throughout the whole process.
Right. You can't just go ahead without their approval.
Okay, so it's a multi-step process that requires a lot of attention to detail and probably a good lawyer.
Yeah, having a lawyer who knows landlord-tenant law and all the ins and outs of Section 8 can be super helpful. They can help you with the paperwork, deadlines, court procedures, all that.
It's becoming clear that being a Section 8 landlord is not for everyone. It's not some get-rich-quick scheme.
Yeah.
It takes real work and commitment. You need to be organized and comfortable working within, a pretty complex system.
It's definitely not passive income, but for those who are willing to put in the effort, understand the rules, and treat their tenants fairly, it can be a good investment strategy.
Yeah, providing decent housing to those in need and getting reliable income in return.
Exactly.
But let's be realistic. We've talked about the potential upsides, but what are the biggest downsides? What are the risks landlords need to be aware of?
Well, we've already talked about the bureaucracy and the complexities of the eviction process. But another big downside is the potential for limited rent increases.
Right, those fair market rents.
Exactly. They're usually set just once a year, and you can't go above that even if the market is going crazy.
So you might miss out on some of those big rent increases that you might see with other properties.
Right, and that's something landlords really have to think about. Is that trade-off, that stability, worth potentially missing out on higher rental income?
It's all about finding that balance.
Exactly. And beyond just the financial stuff, there's also the time and effort involved in being a Section 8 landlord. You have to deal with inspections, paperwork, maybe even court proceedings.
It's not for the faint of heart.
It's not.
Yeah.
I think the big takeaway here is that knowledge is power. The more you know about Section 8, the better decisions you can make about whether it's right for you.
And that goes for tenants too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Understanding your rights and responsibilities within the program can make a huge difference in your experience.
Okay, so we've done a deep dive into Section 8. We've looked at it from all angles. But remember, it's just one piece of the puzzle when it comes to affordable housing in Arizona.
Right. There are other programs and initiatives worth looking into.
Both for those who are looking for housing and those who are, wanting to get involved in this space.
Exactly. And next, we're going to explore those other programs. We'll give you a wider view of the affordable housing landscape in Arizona.
Sounds good. So we'll take a look at things like the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, private activity bonds, and the State Housing Fund.
All tools that are being used to create more affordable housing options for people in Arizona.
All right, let's do it. Okay, so we talked a lot about Section 8, but now I want to zoom out and look at those other affordable housing programs you mentioned. It seems like the Arizona Department of Housing has a whole bunch of tools in their toolbox beyond just Section 8.
They really do.
Yeah.
And it's pretty impressive to see all the different ways they're tackling this housing crisis. There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Right. So let's start with the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, LIHTC for short. I've heard of it, but honestly, the whole tax credit thing kind of makes my head spin.
Yeah, I get it. It sounds complicated, but it's actually pretty straightforward. Yeah. Basically, it gives tax incentives to developers who build or rehabilitate affordable housing.
So it's like a way to encourage private investment in projects that might not be profitable enough otherwise?
Exactly. It's been really successful across the country. I mean, thousands of affordable rental units have been created through LIHTC. It's made a real difference for low-income families and individuals.
It's interesting how they're using private investment to address a social problem. But how does it actually work? Do developers just get a big check from the government?
Not exactly. It's more like developers compete for these tax credits. And the credits are awarded based on things like the project's location, how many affordable units they're creating, the developer's track record, that kind of thing.
So there's a process. It's not just a free-for-all.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And then once a developer gets the credits, they can use them to lower their own taxes or sell them to investors who want tax breaks. That's where the private investment comes in.
Okay, so it's a win-win. Developers get help building affordable housing and investors get a tax benefit. What about those private activity bonds we mentioned earlier? How did those work?
Private activity bonds are another tool for financing affordable housing. They're tax-exempt bonds issued by state or local governments for projects that, benefit the public. And affordable housing definitely fits that bill.
So it's like a loan, but with some tax advantages for the developers.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. By issuing these bonds, governments can help developers get lower-cost financing, which makes those projects more affordable to build and operate.
It sounds like they're really trying to make developing affordable housing more appealing.
They are. And it's not just about making it appealing, it's about making it possible. A lot of these projects just wouldn't happen without these kinds of financial tools.
Okay, so we've got tax credits, we've got bonds. What about the State Housing Fund? Is that direct funding?
The State Housing Fund is kind of like a multi-tool for affordable housing.
Really?
Yeah, it provides funding for a whole range of things. New construction, rehab projects, down payment assistance for first-time homebuyers, rental assistance. You name it, they probably fund it.
Wow, so they're covering both sides, building new units and helping people afford the ones that already exist.
Exactly. They get it, The housing crisis needs a multi-pronged approach.
It's encouraging to see that level of dedication. But it's not all about the money, right? The Arizona Department of Housing also works on community development, right?
Absolutely. They work with local communities to, improve existing housing, revitalize neighborhoods, and make those communities stronger and more livable.
So it's not just about putting up buildings, it's about investing in people and places?
Right. It's about understanding that having a stable, affordable place to live is fundamental. It's essential for people to thrive and for communities to thrive.
And speaking of different types of housing, we can't forget about manufactured homes. They don't always have the best reputation, but they can be a more affordable option, right?
For sure. Manufactured homes play a huge role in affordable housing, and the Arizona Department of Housing actually has a whole division that focuses on making sure those homes meet safety standards and that residents are protected.
It's great that they're paying attention to that part of the market. For a lot of folks, manufactured homes are a way to become homeowners or to find stable, affordable rentals.
Right. Exactly. It's all about making sure everyone has options. You know, everyone deserves a safe, decent, affordable place to live, no matter their income or situation.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening. We've gone from like the nitty-gritty of Section 8 to this broader view of the affordable housing landscape in Arizona. And honestly, I'm feeling pretty optimistic after learning about all these programs and all the work they're doing.
Me too. It's clear that the Arizona Department of Housing is really committed to tackling this housing crisis. And while there's still work to do, it's really heartening to see all these resources and effort going towards such an important issue.
It's a good reminder that even when things feel really challenging, there are people out there working hard to make things better, and that gives me a lot of hope.
Absolutely. And hopefully it inspires our listeners to get involved too. Whether it's volunteering, advocating for policies that support affordable housing, or just learning more about these issues, we can all contribute to a more just and equitable housing system.
Couldn't agree more. Knowledge is power, and taking action is how we turn that knowledge into real positive change. So to everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We encourage you to keep learning, keep asking questions, and find ways to make a difference in your community. And remember, the fight for affordable housing is a fight for a better future for all of us.
Well said. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a world where everyone has a place they can call home.